"You're done here, Miss Hartwell. Effective immediately." Roland Decker said it without standing up. He didn't offer Sabine a chair. He didn't set down his coffee. He spoke to her the way powerful men speak to furniture, not because she didn't matter, but because in his mind she had already stopped existing. Sabine Hartwell stood in the center of Roland's glass-walled corner office on the 14th floor of Meridian Freight Solutions and said nothing for a moment. The Atlanta skyline spread behind him like a backdrop he had ordered custom. She had looked at that skyline from this building for 6 years, longer than Roland Decker had known the company existed. "May I ask why?" she said. Roland finally glanced up. He studied her the way someone studies a produce label, brief, impersonal, already reaching for the next thing. 44 years old, no designer blazer, no advanced degree frame behind her, just a quiet black woman in clean slacks and flat shoes with a legal pad tucked under her arm and grease pen marks on her left hand from a system diagnostic she'd run at 5 that morning. "The organization is evolving," he said. "We need engineers who can scale with us, people with the credentials to lead a system of this complexity." Sabine looked at him steadily. "I built the system." Roland smiled the smile of a man who has already made his decision and found the current conversation mildly inconvenient. "Your contributions are appreciated. HR has your paperwork." He returned to his phone. "Security will walk you out." Sabine left without another word. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. She walked to her workstation on the 3rd floor, packed her external hard drive and her grandmother's photograph into a canvas tote bag, and she walked out of Meridian Freight Solutions on a Wednesday morning in March, with the Atlanta traffic grinding below, and the spring sky the flat gray of something about to change. In 21 days, the woman Roland Decker had called inadequate would be the only person in the world who could save the system quietly tearing itself apart, and the only one who held the legal right to let him keep using it. Have you ever watched someone walk back into a room that humiliated them and make every person in that room go absolutely silent? Because you are about to. Sabine sat in her car in the parking deck for 11 minutes. Then she called home. "Mom, you're early." Cora's voice carried the sharp brightness of a child who notices everything. 11 years old. She could read a system diagram faster than most adults and had been drawing flowcharts of imaginary networks since she was 7. Sabine's daughter, her entire world. "Wrapping up early today, baby. Go ahead and start your homework. We're doing group theory tonight." "I know, I'll be home by 6. She hung up before the silence between them could say anything Cora didn't need to hear yet. The drive took 40 minutes in traffic. Sabine spent each one of them not thinking about Roland Decker, because Roland Decker was not the point. The point was the work. The work had always been the point. 6 months before Roland arrived, Meridian Freight Solutions had been something worth building. A mid-sized logistics company operating across 11 southeastern states, Meridian moved industrial freight, auto, parts, medical equipment, bulk construction materials, for a client roster that included some of the largest manufacturers in the region. Their competitive edge was precision, on-time delivery rates that beat every regional competitor by 8 to 12 points. That edge had a name. CoreFlow was a proprietary adaptive routing intelligence system, not software purchased off a shelf, not a vendor solution customized with Meridian's logo on the dashboard. CoreFlow was built from the ground up, designed to learn the behavioral patterns of Meridian's freight network, weather delays, port congestion, driver shift cycles, highway incident clustering, and reroute shipments in real time before problems reached the client. It had taken Sabine Hartwell 4 years, 300 legal pads, and more midnight hours than she had ever counted to build it. No team, no engineering department behind her. Her title at Meridian said Senior Systems Analyst, which was what the original operations director had offered her when she arrived, because corporate structure didn't have a box that fit what she actually was. She had accepted it without complaint. She was not there for the title. She was there for the work. Sabine learned systems the same way she learned everything, by taking them apart. Her grandmother, Beatrice Hartwell, Nana Bea to everyone in the Vine City neighborhood where they grew up, had run a small bookkeeping and repairs operation out of the front room of her house on Ashby Street. She kept the books for 6 neighborhood businesses, taught herself basic accounting from library textbooks, and fixed everything from broken calculators to HVAC thermostats because paying a repairman was money she did not have. "You find the logic first," Nana Bia would tell young Sabine, setting a disassembled adding machine on the kitchen table between them. "Everything that breaks tells you why it broke. You just have to learn how it talks." Sabine learned how machines talked. She learned how data talked. She read every logistic optimization paper she could find, taught herself Python and then R, and then built her own modeling language for network flow problems because none of the existing ones behaved the way she needed them to. She did this between shifts working data entry at a freight brokerage outside Decatur, then as a routing coordinator, then as a systems analyst who had outgrown her title before she'd held it 6 months. She had no college degree. She had never taken a formal computer science course. She had 3 patents. The patents mattered more than anyone at Meridian had ever fully understood, because Meridian's legal team had drafted her employment contract in the standard boilerplate for senior analysts, not for an IP licenser. The contract bundled her provisional patents into a licensing arrangement, with a clause that only an unusually careful reader would have flagged. Termination without cause revoked the license automatically, with a 90-day wind-down period. Nobody at Meridian had been a careful enough reader, not even Roland Decker's team, when they arrived. Roland Decker came from Nexum Capital, a private equity firm that had acquired a 38% stake in Meridian 9 months before Sabine's termination. He had 22 years in operational restructuring, a Harvard MBA, and a vocabulary built entirely of words that sounded like progress and meant reduction. He called it talent realignment. In his first 11 weeks at Meridian, Roland realigned 14 positions. 11 of those employees were black, 2 were Latino. The 14th was a white operations manager named Doug, who had formally objected in writing to the termination of a black routing supervisor with 16 years of perfect records. Roland never used the word race. He never needed to. The math did the work for him. The people being shown the door held combined tenure of over 140 years at Meridian. Their replacements, each one younger, each one white, each one carrying credentials like currency, arrived with confidence and no working knowledge of what they had just inherited. Sabine had watched it happen from the 3rd floor. She'd watched Devin Clark pack his desk after 12 years on the freight operations team. She'd watched Kezia Abrams, who could read a logistics bottleneck 3 days before any algorithm flagged it, escorted to the elevator by HR. She'd watched the floor change in small ways that felt like the slow lowering of a room's temperature. People stopped laughing. People stopped arguing. People started calculating whether eye contact with management was an asset or a liability. She had told herself she was different. She had built the system these people were using. That had to mean something. It didn't. The morning after Sabine was terminated, a young man named Trent Garrison walked through Meridian's lobby doors carrying an MIT Systems Engineering diploma and the particular confidence of someone who has been told he is exceptional so many times that he has confused the telling for proof. 27 years old, 1 published paper in automated logistics modeling, no field experience. Roland had recruited him from a consulting firm that had never operated a freight network, but had billed 3 Fortune 500 companies for advising on one. Trent was handed the CoreFlow system on a Tuesday morning and introduced as Senior Director of Intelligent Systems. He had a standing desk, a whiteboard the size of a wall, and 3 direct reports who had each worked with Sabine for years and said nothing when they heard the title. Sabine met with Trent for 40 minutes on her last day. She walked him through the adaptive threshold protocols, the anomaly detection sequence, the 12-layer routing logic she had engineered to respond to live data rather than historical models. She explained the self-calibrating delay buffers she had built along the Gulf Coast corridor, specifically because that stretch of highway had a pattern of weekend incident clustering that no standard system would catch. She tried to explain that CoreFlow was not software. It was an argument she had built with a machine about how the world worked. Trent nodded twice and checked his phone once. "I appreciate the context," he said, rolling his chair back slightly. I've actually published in this exact space. I think I can take it from here." He said, "Take it from here the way someone says I've got this before missing a step." It took 8 days. Day 8, a calibration drift in the southeast routing cluster. Shipment windows for 3 major clients slipped by 4 hours. Trent adjusted the threshold parameters and filed a report calling it a normal stabilization lag. Day 12, the drift doubled. The Gulf Coast corridor flagged 17 misrouted shipments in a single 24-hour period. A component supplier in Birmingham called Meridian's account manager and used the words breach of contract. Day 15, Trent brought in 2 consultants from his former firm. They spent 3 days analyzing CoreFlow's architecture and produced a 40-page report that identified 22 points of failure and recommended a full system migration to a commercial logistics SaaS platform. The estimated transition cost was $1.4 million and would take 5 months. Client-facing disruption would be, in their words, manageable. Day 17, Halcyon Shipping Group, Meridian's largest single client, representing $18.3 million in annual freight contracts, placed a formal notice of concern. Their procurement director sent the letter directly to Lawrence Holt. Lawrence Holt was 76 years old. He had founded Meridian Freight Solutions from a 1-truck operation in Savannah in 1986 and built it across 4 decades into the company. Roland Decker was now restructuring. He did not take calls on his boat unless they were important. He took this one standing up. The emergency board meeting convened on day 19. The conference room held 12 people. Roland Decker stood at the front with a presentation he had revised 4 times since midnight. His suit was impeccable. His hands were not entirely steady. "CoreFlow is undergoing a transition optimization phase," he said, clicking to a routing performance chart that dropped like a cliff face. "This is expected disruption during any modernization initiative. Trent Garrison is implementing structural upgrades that will bring performance back to baseline within." "Within what?" Lawrence Holt's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "A quarter? Halcyon is invoking the exit clause review. That is $18 million, Roland. Tell me what happened to my system." The room was still. The system required credential-aligned leadership too. "Who built it?" Lawrence's eyes didn't move. "Give me the name of the person who designed and built CoreFlow. Right now." Silence spread across the table like water finding level. Faye Okonkwo had been at Meridian for 9 years. She ran the data operations support team on the 3rd floor. She had a daughter in college and a mortgage she could not afford to lose. She had stayed quiet through 14 terminations because staying quiet had felt like the only way to stay standing. But she had spent 4 years watching Sabine Hartwell arrive before dawn and leave after midnight to build something no one in that room had ever fully tried to understand. Faye straightened in her chair. "Her name is Sabine Hartwell." Her voice carried clean across the room. "She designed and built CoreFlow from the ground up. Every routing protocol, every adaptive threshold, every self-diagnostic layer. She built it over 4 years, while her title said Senior Systems Analyst." She paused. "Roland terminated her employment 3 weeks ago." Lawrence Holt turned and looked at Roland Decker the way a man looks at a crack in a load-bearing wall. "You fired the person who built the system. She didn't have the academic credentials to." "I did not ask about credentials." Lawrence's voice dropped to something colder and heavier than anything that had been spoken in that room all morning. "I asked whether you fired the person whose work is the reason Halcyon Shipping signed with us in the first place." Roland opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. Lawrence picked up the phone at the center of the conference table and made 2 calls. The 3rd person he dialed was Dr. Elspeth Norris. Dr. Elspeth Norris was 61 years old. She held 7 patents in supply chain intelligence systems. She had consulted for 3 of the largest logistics networks in North America and had spent a decade teaching graduate-level freight systems engineering at Georgia Tech before she decided she preferred the work to the classroom. When Elspeth Norris examined a logistics system, companies tended to restructure themselves around her conclusions. She arrived at Meridian the following morning at 7 a.m. with a laptop, a worn field notebook, and a diagnostic methodology she had been refining for 30 years. She spent 6 hours with CoreFlow. She did not speak to Trent Garrison. She did not review the consultant's 40-page report. She went line by line through the system's architecture the way an archaeologist goes through a site, carefully, with attention to what lay beneath the surface. When she returned to the boardroom, 11 people were waiting. "Who built this system?" she asked before she sat down. "A woman named Sabine Hartwell," Faye said from the far end of the table. "She was terminated 3 weeks ago." Elspeth set her notebook on the table. "I have reviewed logistics intelligence systems on 4 continents. In 30 years of consulting, I have never encountered adaptive routing architecture at this level of integration. Whoever built this system understood not just how freight networks move, but how they fail, and she designed CoreFlow to learn from failure in real time." She looked at the board members along the wall. "The modifications made in the past 3 weeks have systematically disabled that learning capacity. The system isn't malfunctioning. It's been prevented from doing what it was built to do." Every head in the room turned toward Trent Garrison. Trent's face had gone the color of old chalk. "Bring Sabine Hartwell back," Elspeth said. "Today, and before you call her, I suggest someone in this room reads her employment contract very carefully." The company's general counsel read the contract in 45 minutes and returned to the boardroom, wearing the expression of someone who has just discovered a gas leak. The licensing clause was unambiguous. Sabine Hartwell's 3 pending patents, covering the core algorithmic architecture underlying CoreFlow's adaptive routing intelligence, had been licensed to Meridian Freight Solutions under the terms of her employment agreement. Clause 14 stated that termination without cause by the employer triggered an automatic license revocation, effective upon a 90-day notice period. Meridian had terminated Sabine Hartwell 19 days ago. They had 71 days to reach an agreement before they could no longer legally operate the system she had built. Roland Decker sat very still while the general counsel explained this. His face moved through several expressions before settling on the one men wear when they understand, for the first time, the full dimensions of what they have done. Sabine got the call from Faye at 6:15 in the morning. She was in her driveway, underneath her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson's Buick LeSabre, replacing a rusted brake line for $60 because Mrs. Patterson was on a fixed income, and Sabine's savings had 3 more weeks in them before the math got honest. She had spent the days since her termination fixing cars and appliances for neighbors who couldn't afford service calls. Doing it because her hands needed to work, and because Nana Bea had always said you don't let your tools sit idle. She slid out from under the car. The sky over Atlanta was pale orange at the edges. "Sabine," Faye's voice was controlled and careful, "I need you to hear me before you say no." "I'm listening." CoreFlow is failing. The board has seen the numbers. Dr. Elspeth Norris has been in the building since yesterday morning. Lawrence Holt is asking for you personally. A pause, and their legal team has now read your contract. Sabine sat on the cold driveway with the phone against her ear and grease on her knuckles, the same hands that had written 3 patent applications in longhand on yellow legal pads over 3 consecutive Augusts because she couldn't afford a patent attorney until the 3rd one. "Asking for me." She let the words sit in the air for a moment. "Roland Decker is asking for me." Holt is asking. Roland is present for the asking, which I'm told is deeply uncomfortable for him. Something shifted in Sabine's chest. Not satisfaction. Not yet. Something older, what Nana Bea had called the moment before the work begins. "I'll come," Sabine said, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "I walk through the front entrance, not the service door. The front." "Done." "Full access to CoreFlow's infrastructure. No one shadows me. No one supervises my methods. I work the way I work." "Done." "Trent Garrison is in the room the entire time. I want him to see everything." A pause. "Agreed." "One more thing." Sabine looked at Mrs. Patterson's Buick, at the tools laid out in careful order on the concrete beside her. "Whatever they want to offer me, that conversation happens after I fix the system, not before. I'm not negotiating while CoreFlow is bleeding." Sabine Hartwell arrived at Meridian Freight Solutions the next morning at 7:45 a.m. She wore clean dark slacks, a gray cable-knit sweater, and the same flat shoes she'd been wearing the day Roland Decker told her she didn't have the credentials. She carried a canvas tote and a laptop she had bought refurbished 3 years ago. The lobby security guard held the door for her. He had worked the morning shift at Meridian for 8 years. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once, and it meant something. The operations center occupied the building's 3rd floor, a wide open room of monitoring stations and display walls showing live freight data across 11 states. When Sabine walked in, the room was quieter than it should have been. Workers stood along the walls near their stations. 3 board members had come down from the conference room. Lawrence Holt sat in a chair someone had carried from a side office. Dr. Elspeth Norris leaned near the main display wall with her arms crossed and her field notebook open. Roland Decker stood in the far corner, hands in his pockets, jaw set. The most expensive suit Sabine had ever seen in this building, and it looked like the only thing holding him upright. Trent Garrison stood beside the CoreFlow primary interface. The display showed amber warning indicators across 9 routing clusters. The system's real-time accuracy score was at 61%. On Sabine's last day, it had been at 97.4. Sabine didn't greet anyone. She walked straight to the CoreFlow terminal. She placed both palms flat on the edge of the console. She stood there. The room watched a woman listen to a machine she had built. 40 seconds, a minute, 2. Then she opened her eyes. "You disabled the memory bridge on the Gulf Coast corridor," she said without turning toward Trent. "Then you recalibrated the incident threshold to standard FMCSA benchmarks." Trent stiffened. The existing thresholds weren't documented in the system manual. "Because I didn't write a manual for that. I built it into the system's logic." Sabine pulled open the secondary access panel on the right side of the terminal and began working. CoreFlow doesn't use FMCSA incident benchmarks because those benchmarks were designed for compliance reporting, not real-time routing. I gave it a different language, a regional one, built from 8 years of actual Gulf Coast incident data. She connected a diagnostic cable from her laptop to a port behind the panel. You reset it to speak a language it was never designed for. She typed a command sequence. The display shifted. A routing simulation ran in the Gulf Coast corridor with the original thresholds restored. The amber warnings cleared on that cluster immediately, like fog burned off by morning sun. A low sound moved through the workers along the walls. Not applause, something quieter and more certain. Then Sabine found what she had been looking for. She crouched beside the terminal housing, ran her fingers along the base panel until she found a seam, visible only if you knew where to look, and pressed 2 points simultaneously. A secondary panel released with a soft pneumatic click. Inside sat a compact module, matte black, roughly the size of a thick hardcover book. A small amber LED pulsed steadily on its surface, slow and even as a heartbeat. "What is that?" Elspeth moved forward and crouched beside her. "I call it the witness." Sabine connected her laptop. Data filled the screen immediately. Timestamps, routing decisions, system modifications, parameter changes, everything CoreFlow had recorded and stored since the day it went live. It's a continuous operational log. I embedded it in CoreFlow's architecture during the 2nd year of build. It records every input to the system, every routing call, every parameter adjustment, every modification, and stores it in an isolated archive that doesn't appear in any visible documentation. She turned the screen toward the room, including every change made in the last 19 days. The log was a precise and damning record of exactly what had happened to CoreFlow since Trent Garrison took control of it. Every standard threshold he had applied, every adaptive function he had toggled off without understanding what it did, every place where the system had tried to correct itself and been overridden by someone who mistook the correction for an error. The witness had recorded every moment of the slow unraveling with the patience of something designed specifically to tell this truth. Elspeth read the log in silence for 2 full minutes, then she stood. "You built a self-archiving operational record into a live production logistics system." Her voice had changed, quieter, more careful, the way a person speaks when they're trying to stay measured about something that is actually extraordinary. It captured continuous data from every subsystem and stored it independently of the primary interface. I needed to know the system would be able to explain itself, Sabine said, even if I wasn't there. Elspeth turned toward the board members on the observation level. I have been in transportation systems consulting for 30 years. I have never encountered a single engineer build with this level of internal documentation architecture. What Sabine Hartwell built here is one of the most sophisticated pieces of adaptive logistics intelligence I have reviewed in this industry. She paused to let the words settle, and the witness has now recorded exactly how it was damaged, and by whom. Nobody moved. The operations center was very still. Lawrence Holt rose from his chair, 76 years old, standing in the middle of a freight operations floor, and the authority behind it was absolute. He turned to Sabine. Show us everything. If you've watched this far, if you felt what Sabine felt, standing in that operations center, facing the man who had called her inadequate while her own system hummed behind her, then I need you to do one thing before I tell you what happened next. Leave a comment below. Tell me, if you were Sabine, would you go back? Would you fix the machine and negotiate your terms? Or would you let them sit with it and build something new on your own? Drop your answer right now. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Velvet Reckoning, because the end of this story is something you won't want to miss. For the next 80 minutes, Sabine ran CoreFlow through every system she had designed. The predictive delay buffer built to anticipate highway incident clustering on a 14-day rolling model. The client-specific SLA protection layer that automatically rerouted priority freight when weather patterns exceeded historical variance thresholds. The adaptive learning protocol that had been running silently since CoreFlow's first live week, building a behavioral map of Meridian's entire freight network from actual operational data. A map that existed nowhere else, in no other system, in no external database. Features that could have been marketed and licensed for millions. Features that had simply been doing their work, invisibly, because Sabine had built them to work and then gotten back to work herself. Board members on the observation level had stopped taking notes. They watched Sabine's hands move across the interface with the precision of someone who understood what the machine was saying because she had taught it how to speak. At one point, she activated a maintenance forecast module that projected system component degradation across a 6-month horizon based on routing load and environmental variance data. The screen displayed each subsystem mapped against a probability timeline, every potential failure point scheduled for attention before it could become a crisis. I built this because guessing is how operations fail, she said quietly, more to the display than to the room. You shouldn't have to wait for something to break to know it's about to. Elspeth stood beside her without speaking. She had stopped writing in her field notebook 20 minutes earlier. She was simply watching. When the demonstration ended, Lawrence Holt turned to face Roland Decker. I have a question for you. He held up a printed document, a sheaf of papers Faye had pulled from Meridian's internal archive. Sabine Hartwell submitted detailed technical documentation for every CoreFlow system she designed. Monthly reports, architecture summaries, performance analyses, 3 years of engineering records filed through proper channels. He read from the top page. Here is what your office stamped on the report she submitted 14 months ago, describing the adaptive learning protocol and the witness module. He looked up. Not applicable to current operational scope, returned without review. Roland's jaw tightened. I was rationalizing documentation workflows across. She submitted a report describing a self-learning logistics intelligence system with an embedded operational archive, and your office returned it unread. Lawrence set the document on the console beside him, because the name on the report belonged to a Senior Systems Analyst. His voice dropped to something that had no anger left in it, only the flat weight of a fact being named plainly in a room full of people who could no longer pretend not to see it. And because you had already decided, before you read a single word she wrote, that her work was not worth your time. He did not say the rest of what he meant. He did not need to. Everyone in that room could finish the sentence. Everyone in that room understood exactly why those reports had been returned, and why the terminations had followed the pattern they followed, and what word lived underneath the clean vocabulary Roland Decker had used for 11 weeks. Roland opened his mouth. Lawrence turned away before he could speak. He turned to Sabine. "Name your terms." 3 people remained in the operations center when everyone else had filtered out. Lawrence Holt, Dr. Elspeth Norris, and Sabine Hartwell. Someone brought coffee in plain ceramic mugs from the break room. Lawrence drank his without comment. He was not a man who noticed cups. "You understand the patent situation," Lawrence said. "I do. Counsel tells me you have 71 days on the wind-down clock." He set his mug down. "I'd like to stop that clock permanently." Sabine held her coffee. She did not yet drink it. "I want to offer you the position of Chief Systems Officer," Lawrence said. "Full authority over CoreFlow and all future technology development at Meridian. Compensation that reflects what you have actually built for this company." He paused. "Which is, to be direct, considerable." Elspeth leaned forward. "I have a parallel offer. My consulting firm is expanding its technology development practice. I want your name on our publications, your methods in our curriculum, your patents visible, credited, and protected." Sabine looked at both of them. She thought about Nana Bia, who had fixed broken things in a front room on Ashby Street because someone had to, and she was the someone. She thought about Cora, who had spent the last 3 weeks watching her mother slide under strangers' cars and never asked a question she couldn't see the answer to. She thought about the 3 patent applications she had filed in longhand on yellow legal pads, and the clause buried in paragraph 14, and the witness still pulsing its quiet amber light behind its panel, having recorded everything. "I have conditions," she said. Lawrence nodded once. "I expected you would." Every employee terminated under Roland Decker's leadership receives a phone call. A real one. Not a form letter from HR. A conversation from someone who can explain why this company made a mistake and what it intends to do about it. She met Lawrence's eyes. Some of them won't come back. They've built new lives. They've moved on because moving on was how they survived. But they deserve to be asked. Done. My name goes on the CoreFlow architecture. The original design documents, the patent applications, every piece of technical record that currently reads proprietary Meridian technology without naming the person who built it. It'll be in writing by end of week. And the witness data. Sabine set her coffee down. The full operational log, every modification, every suppressed report, every parameter change made to CoreFlow in the last 19 days, goes to your legal team and to the EEOC filing that Phi Okonkwo has already begun preparing. Not as leverage, as record. She paused. What happened to this company's workforce was not subtle and it was not ambiguous. The witness makes it plain. It should exist somewhere, officially, that it happened. Lawrence Holt looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Done," and meant every letter of it. The board voted 12 days later. Roland Decker was removed as CEO of Meridian Freight Solutions. The formal motion cited systematic misalignment of talent strategy and suppression of critical operational documentation. Those were the clean words. Everyone in the room understood the real ones. An investigation followed. Under Roland's 22-week tenure, 16 employees had been terminated. 13 were racial minorities. Their replacements in every case had less field experience and produced lower operational metrics. The pattern was not subtle. It was not a coincidence. It was exactly what it looked like, documented in detail by the witness, corroborated by Fay's archive of suppressed reports, and confirmed in sworn testimony from 9 former employees whose stories, once placed side by side, told the same story without having been coordinated to do so. Roland's separation package, initially structured at $900,000, was voided under the gross misconduct clause in his Nexum Capital employment rider. His legal team filed an objection. Meridian's counsel responded with the witness data, the archive of returned without review engineering reports, and a timeline of terminations that no attorney could make look like coincidence. The objection was withdrawn in 6 days. Trent Garrison submitted his resignation the morning after the board vote. He did not hold a press conference. He packed his standing desk quietly and left Meridian the same way Devin Clark and Kezia Abrams had left it, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, in the particular silence of someone departing a place where they had not, in the end, belonged. But before he left, he found Sabine alone in the operations center, running a recalibration sequence on the Gulf Coast corridor. "I need to say something," he said from the doorway. Sabine kept working for a moment. Then she set down her stylus and turned. "Roland told me CoreFlow was a legacy patchwork," Trent said. His hands hung at his sides. He said the previous analyst had built something held together with workarounds, that modernizing it was the whole point of bringing me in. He looked at the display wall. 11 states, live freight data, clean and accurate and running at 98%. I didn't question it because I wanted to believe I was the right person for this. Sabine looked at him directly. "You're not a bad engineer, Trent." He blinked. "But you walked into a system you had never seen, built by someone you had never met, and you decided in 10 minutes that you understood it better than she did." She turned back to her work. "Next time someone tries to show you how something works, the whole thing, not just the part you already recognize, let them finish." Trent stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he nodded once, quietly, and walked out of Meridian Freight Solutions for the last time. Word moved through the logistics industry the way all important things move, slowly at first, then all at once. Roland Decker's name became the kind of cautionary story that doesn't get taught in business school, but gets repeated in boardrooms and hiring committees for years afterward. The executive who systematically eliminated his company's most experienced workforce fired the woman who held the patents to its most valuable system and came within 71 days of losing the legal right to operate it, all because he had confused credentials with competence and confidence with understanding. Halcyon Shipping did not just renew their contract, they expanded it. The new agreement was worth $22 million annually, nearly $4 million more than the original. Their procurement director called Lawrence personally. "Whatever you changed," she said, "keep it." "I didn't change anything," Lawrence said. "I stopped dismantling what was already working." Devin Clark came back. Kezia Abrams came back. Not all 16 answered the call. Some had moved too far, rebuilt too fully, carried wounds that a phone call couldn't close because the memory of being discarded doesn't wash off in a conversation, no matter how sincere. But the ones who returned found a different Meridian waiting for them. One where the chief systems officer was a woman who had taught herself everything she knew from library books and broken appliances and her grandmother's kitchen table on Ashby Street, and who had built the company's most valuable asset in silence, and then walked back into the room that had thrown her away and made every suit in it go quiet. 4 months later, Sabine stood at the observation window on Meridian's 3rd floor. Below her, CoreFlow ran at 98.8% routing accuracy, 0 SLA violations in 11 consecutive weeks. The witness pulsed its steady amber light behind its hidden panel, recording everything: the health of the system, the rhythm of the work, the slow accumulation of days when things ran right. On her desk sat a framed photograph of Cora at age 7, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, with a hand-drawn network diagram spread across her knees and an expression of absolute concentration on her face, the kind children wear when they have found the thing they are built for. Next to it sat a worn mechanical pencil, with a rubber grip darkened by years of use. Nana Bea had bought it at a dollar store on Ashby Street when Sabine was 9 years old and placed it in her hand without ceremony, because that was how Nana Bea gave gifts, without preamble, without explanation, trusting that the recipient would understand what it meant. Cora visited that afternoon. She stood at the observation window, watching the CoreFlow display. 11 states, hundreds of freight corridors, thousands of active shipments rerouting in real time across the face of the map, all of it the expression of a system that had been built to learn and had been learning ever since. "You built all of that, Mom?" "Most of it." Sabine stood beside her. "The rest it built itself." Cora pressed her hand flat against the glass, watching a cluster of roots shift and settle in the southeast corridor. "Can you teach me?" Sabine looked at her daughter's hand against the window, then at the display, then at the city spread out beyond it. Atlanta in late afternoon light, everything in motion, everything connected. "You find the logic first," she said. "Everything that breaks tells you why it broke. You just have to learn how it talks. If this story moved you, if you believe that what a person builds belongs to them, that talent doesn't start with a diploma, that the work should speak, and the name behind it should be heard. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Velvet Reckoning for more stories like this one, and leave a comment below. Have you ever built something that someone else claimed? Have you ever been underestimated because of what was missing from your resume, or because of what you looked like when you walked into the room? Tell me your story. I'll be reading every single one.